Hi everyone, today I'm going to do another video on my series, Is This Home Right For You? And we are going to talk about the 1.5 story homes. A home that is not just the Cape Cod and not just the wartime house, but also a variety of different houses that you will find typically throughout New Brunswick and a lot of different areas in Moncton. Now, this is a Moncton based video, so this is primarily New Brunswick. However, this will probably apply to other areas inside Canada and outside of Canada. So let's go over the different types of 1.5 story houses. I'm going to start with the obvious wartime house. These ones typically are a little bit on the smaller side, usually around 1,100 square feet above grade, with about 3 bedrooms upstairs, sometimes 2 bedrooms, and you may or may not be able to have a bathroom up there. In my experience, you usually do not find 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. It's usually 2 bedrooms or 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, or just 3 bedrooms. Now, these specific ones primarily are going to be found in the Moncton Hospital area. That's probably where about 80% of the ones in Moncton will be. However, you can sometimes find them in niche older parts of Riverview and some other areas around the Essex region. So I say Essex, I mean around Essex Street, around Norwood. There's not really a name for that area. It's called Central Moncton in our system. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's not quite downtown, but it is on the fringe of downtown around that Mountain Road area. This would also include parts near Trimble, and to a certain extent, some areas near Birchmount. However, Birchmount does not really have that style of home. These homes I find are pretty good for people who are first time buyers that are looking for something that's close to the hospital, ideal for people who are working at the hospital and need to get to the hospital. One of the problems in Moncton, of course, is we just don't have parking near the hospital, and that really has driven up rents near the area. Like the American Foursquare, it's also good for someone who's looking to potentially get rental income, usually in the basement, though, if the zoning allows for it. Now, up until really the last year or two, the prices on these things were excellent. It was not uncommon where you could get a 1.5 story home for, 200K, 250K. Now, a lot of those are kind of getting up towards to 300K, and that's kind of where it's not as good of a deal. However, if you go in East Dieppe, you can find similar styles of home, albeit much smaller, on streets like Appleton. And those can sometimes be acquired under 200K. I've even seen those things go as low as 100, 105. Now let's talk about the Cape Cod, the most attractive version of the 1.5 story home. These are defined by having dormers, and like any other 1.5 story home, they are going to have slanted or sloped ceilings in the second level. The dormers I find add a lot of curb appeal. Anyone who knows me knows that I love dormers, and I like the functionality that the dormer gives. It kind of makes your second level feel more like a 2 story, even though it's technically not. All right, now let's talk about a very niche style of home, one that you typically are not going to find in a lot of different parts of Moncton. However, they are concentrated heavily around the Louisville area, and that is the Dutch colonial. A Dutch colonial can be a lot of different things. You can have Second Empire style Dutch colonials that'll be 2.5 stories. However, I'm just going to focus on the newer version of the Dutch colonial that were typically 1.5 stories, usually built around 1930, 1940 in the Moncton area. It'll probably vary depending where you live, but that's generally speaking what you're going to find in Moncton. The Dutch colonials, I would say probably 80% of the ones I see are in Louisville, and I don't think I've seen too much of them outside of that. Now, outside of the three main types, being the wartime house, the Cape Cod, and the Dutch colonial, you're also going to run into homes that are 1.5 stories that do not look like 1.5 story homes. Oftentimes, you can't tell them from the front, but once you get inside and you see the sloped ceilings on that second level, you know you're in a 1.5 story home. So I'm talking about a lot of those homes you see with the steep pitched roof, and the bedrooms have slanted walls or slanted ceilings, sorry, up top. Those are technically 1.5 story homes, and I would have to say that that is the number one data input error I see on MLS, is not understanding what that 1.5 story home really is. Now, who are these homes best for? It's generally going to change a lot because all of these 1.5 story homes are built typically between 1930 and into the 1950s, and they're going to offer a lot of different risk factors and benefits. If you can get a nice large 1.5 story home, it can be surprisingly great for both growing families and empty nesters who don't want to compromise on the space. However, once you get into the more smaller types of 1.5 story homes, you really want to make sure that what you're getting is enough size for you. The worst thing you can do in real estate is buy something and then have to sell it. So ideally, you want to buy something you can live in for 5 to 7 years. So I would really recommend, if you are buying one of these 1.5 story homes, to keep in mind, do you need 2 full bathrooms? Is 2 bedrooms upstairs good enough? Because it might be the case that 1.5 story home is going to be a really tricky thing for you to look out for. And because they're often listed as 2-story homes, it can be really tricky to figure it out. So next time you're going through a house, look at the ceilings. Are they sloped on the second level? If so, that's a 1.5 story home. Now let's just get into some general risk factors, so pros and cons. It's oftentimes going to be an older house, not quite as old as the American Four Square, but generally built during the golden age of asbestos, meaning you're going to run into everything from knob and tube sometimes to asbestos, sketchy mastic glue. So the glue that they used to use to glue down the old linoleum flooring has asbestos in it oftentimes. So it's important to understand when you're buying any old home in general, do not get into the habit of DIYing and demoing without knowing what you're getting into. Now, this video is going to be shorter. I wish I could make it longer, but frankly, these are very common homes. These are essentially New Brunswick's version of the shotgun home. So the shotgun home was popular in the States. We happen to have a little bit more space here because we're not densely populated during the time when these went up. So you're often going to find larger pieces of land and a little bit wider, but you're going to see a lot of these homes if you're a first-time buyer and you're looking near the hospital area. And I would just recommend being cautious that what you're buying is within your risk tolerance and also not something that you're going to grow out of within a year or two. Alrighty, I want to hear from you too. If there's any story or advice that you would have for anyone buying one of these 1.5 story homes of any type, please drop them in the comments. I'll leave my personal story because I actually own a 1.5 story home too. I found knob and tube twice. I thought it would be fun to switch a light fixture in this house, and then I found knob and tube running through the entire level, and then again in another room in the house. So my story is not super exciting, but it's definitely one that you can learn from. Even if the inspection does not show anything regarding knob and tube, it doesn't mean that you won't find it. Another fun fact is a lot of the plaster and the tiles can have asbestos in them. I decided to do something a little bit reckless. I had a 1 square inch sample of my plaster taken out and sent to a lab. The reason I did this is because I was concerned about asbestos. I wanted to make sure if I'm going to replace the wiring in this house, am I also going to have to replace the asbestos? Because that was not a project I could have taken on. So we sent it off to the lab, or under 1% asbestos, meaning it's not an asbestos containing material, essentially giving me the green light to, open up walls or cut holes, whatever I needed to do to have the wiring changed in the house. Why did I do this? Well, I had an electrician that had a lot of experience rewiring old houses tell me if you see horsehair in the plaster, it's a pretty good indicator that there is some asbestos somewhere in that plaster, and you should get it tested before you start opening it up. Like with any of my videos, this is real estate advice, but it might not be applicable to your specific situation. So make sure to contact relevant professionals prior to making any sort of decision, acquiring or liquidating this sort of product. My opinions are my own. They do not reflect other members of the Canadian Real Estate Association, my office, or other realtors in the area. Please give me a like and subscribe if you like this sort of content. I'll try to put more of it out. Thank you.